I know I'm beating a dead horse, but when it comes to the Left Behind movies on the big screen, you have to realize that this franchise has tried not once, not twice, but three times to get the series started as an ongoing series. And I'm somebody who was a fan of the franchise and actually digested the whole entire main series via dramatic audio on at least two occasions. They are a decent listen some of the time, but I remember these books coming out early in the mid noughts, and they were very popular in the Christian bookstores, very popular amongst Christian students in Christian high school. And of course, with the events of 9/11 happening, the war on terrorism and the second war in Iraq, all that stuff that was happening at the time. So you definitely had people thinking about, oh, the end times are just around the corner. Now, for those who don't get the context, Left Behind was based on a pre tribulation, pre-millennial view in Christian eschatology, which is something that not every Christian believes in nor agrees upon. Now, up until 10th grade in 2004, I did go to a Christian high school that did an entire semester in Bible class going over the 7-year tribulation period, with the pre-trib stance being part of it. And periodically, we'd have chapel services with speakers that would preach about it. Oh, these are all the signs the apocalypse is about to happen. Hell, I remember one day they even did a showing of the first movie on a giant screen for an assembly for all the kids. And it turns out a lot of Christian schools did this, and probably a lot of Christian churches did the same thing. So because this 7-year tribulation period and the book of Revelation and the Left Behind series hand in hand were implanted in my brain for so long in those days that I used to think, oh yeah, it's only a matter of time before the rapture happens and we disappear before the end times and we don't have to deal with the Antichrist or the judgments. Nowadays, my whole thing is, we really don't know what's going to happen. So just be ready. Would I welcome a rapture of the Christian church? Sure. But I understand it's most likely not going to happen. Now, I just think of the Left Behind series as a fun Christian fiction, but not something to be taken seriously. And if you scale back the evangelical preaching overtone and make it more like a C.S. Lewis series of novels, like the Chronicles of Narnia, where the Christian message is a lot more subtle, then you're reading about a world where the aftermath of a global cataclysm of hundreds of millions of people vanishing, a one-world government rises out of the chaos and promises to bring peace and order, led by a charismatic man who claims to have all the answers. This government then proceeds to take control of everything, including media, technology, information, weapons, finances, speech, and eventually becomes a single theocratic government where non-compliance and actions is dubbed treasonous and results in death. So the characters you'd follow would either be from the resistance or be loyal to this government and the situations that follow. And at the same time, there's wars, diseases, famines, disasters, and later you'll see supernatural phenomena happen. All of that right there. Wouldn't that be a great setting for an amazing set of futuristic dystopian novels? Well, there's bits of that in the Left Behind novels. Then there's a lot dedicated to evangelism. Like, a lot dedicated to it. Plus a lot of new characters being added to the mix who convert to Christianity. And even in the dramatic audio, it felt like there was just a lot of unnecessary information and dialogue that gets very repetitive and stale. So it can be argued that everything told in these 16 books could have effectively been told in maybe 6 to 8 at the most. And I'm being generous there. But because of the popularity of this series among Christian readers, in the year 2000, we saw the direct-to-video and then a limited theatrical release of the first Left Behind movie in 2001, which was obviously based off the first book. And by this time, the 8th book was already out. And as we'll get to, pretty much a good chunk of the intense, interesting stuff didn't really start happening until the 3rd book. Now, when this movie was first released, it was actually billed as the biggest and most ambitious Christian movie ever made at the time. Oh yeah, this is going to be the big Christian movie that's going to set the bar. Just kind of like how they said the same thing about God's Not Dead. Oh, yeah, this is going to set the bar. Well, I guess it was so groundbreaking that it had to be rebooted twice. 3 times if you include Vanished. Of course, we can easily make fun of the first movie and its sequels for being your typical Christian movies that star Kirk Cameron. But considering other movies we've seen this guy in, a Kirk Cameron movie about the rapture is probably his most normal movie. And yeah, it's easy to make fun of the special effects, which look horribly cheap, like kind that seem to come from stock videos and settings you get on Windows Movie Maker. It's quite surprising considering this movie had a budget of $17 million. The soundtrack is corny, much of what you would hear in a mainstream Christian PA system at a church. The movie pretty much follows the first book, which is the biggest problem. Yeah, the first book you have the rapture happening near the beginning, and in terms of any other action, you may get that short airstrike scene, a car bomb, and a couple of men getting shot in the climax, but that's it. Something as catastrophic as the rapture, it's depicted in the most mild of circumstances, and any devastation aftermath, it's pretty much implied and very little is shown. Oh, nope, can't be too intense for that Christian audience. They can't take that. Instead, a good chunk is dedicated to a mystery over who's behind the plot to bankrupt the UN and who's financing a world takeover. And anything having to do with the man who becomes the Antichrist is pretty much in the background. The other chunk is, of course, dedicated to how our main characters who were not raptured end up converting to Christianity. So just like most Christian movies that exist, it sacrifices a compelling story with any substance just to be another Sunday sermon altar call. And the thing is, people who watch this movie, even if they're not a Christian, are pretty well aware of what the movie is supposed to be about. Christian characters good, Antichrist character bad. It's not that hard to figure out. And I can only imagine a lot of people thinking, okay, we've had the rapture, now get to the next thing. Get to the more interesting stuff. And then arguably, there's not really anything in this movie that would compel a non-Christian viewer to convert them. And then the second movie came out in 2002. And believe it or not, less happens in the Tribulation Force movie compared to the book. In terms of the book, the signing of the 7-year treaty happens and the outbreak of World War on top of the main characters getting development and getting married. And spoiler, it even has one of the original main characters being killed off. The movie, not even that. Instead, it's centered around more conversion stories. Heck, the entire climax is set up to sound like the Antichrist suffers a defeat due to the sermon being preached at the end by one of the converts. And if you thought the first movie lacked action, the second movie makes the first movie look like a gore fest. And for a movie supposed to portray the prophesized darkest time in human history, the ongoing apocalypse that's supposed to be happening seems very mild and boring in the background. And apparently this was done on purpose, because Kirk Cameron teamed up with Ray Comfort in doing some rewriting to make this sequel even more evangelical and uplifting. Really? A Christian movie starring Christian actors based on a Christian book series mainly for Christian audiences needs to be more uplifting and evangelical? Oh no, don't worry. The third movie is where things finally get serious. I mean, that subtitle, man, World at War. Look at that explosive movie poster and the military vehicles. So wait, is the third movie about the third book?
Nope.
It's the remaining chapters from the second book and parts of the third. Oh, I have a good idea. Let's also include Louis Gossett Jr. playing a character who was minor fodder in the second book and give him a bigger role than Kirk Cameron and have a conversion story around his character before he tries to fight the Antichrist in a showdown. Let's also make Nikolai Carpathia, let's have him display supernatural abilities despite that not supposed to happen yet until the 7th book, and let's include a bunch of other stuff and plot points that doesn't happen in any of the books. What were they thinking? This third movie was a freaking mess, and it's no wonder they had to stop for so long. This felt like Left Behind fan fiction being told. And I will give it this, though. At least the third film isn't boring, but it doesn't save it from being god-awful. Pun intended. What should they have done instead? They should have condensed the first two books down to a single 2-hour movie. Start with the Rapture, have the Antichrist immediately become a sensation and grab power, and then end the movie with the 7-Year Treaty and the outbreak of World War III. Precise, straightforward, keeps things interesting, and it doesn't stray away from the plot. But enough about the Left Behind original trilogy. Hard to believe that's a thing. In 2014, they tried their hand at a reboot of the series, figuring the time to make a Left Behind 4 subtitled We Swear It Gets Interesting had come and gone. The 2014 reboot was made more to appeal less to Christian evangelicals and more to people that have never read the books or are even Christians. After all, it was directed by legendary stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong and included the king of overacting himself, Academy Award winner Nicolas Cage. How did the 2014 movie happen? It's pretty bad. Could you believe that they managed to have less happen in the 2014 movie? Oh, sure, the actual scenes involving the Rapture are more action-packed and intense, but stretching out the Rapture doesn't really offer anything else to it. You have Nicolas Cage playing Rayford, who's flying to London to cheat on his wife when the Rapture happens and his plane might crash. His daughter Chloe sees her brother get raptured, and she's wandering around aimlessly while reacting to scary things. That's it. That's the movie. All of that is fine for maybe the first 20 minutes of a setup before the rest of the plot kicks in, but not for a 105-minute long movie. It's no wonder why so many found this movie insulting. And then the movie acts like the audience doesn't know what the Rapture is. Like, oh, why did these people vanish? It's a mystery. We must investigate. But the problem is, we already know what the title is. We already know the premise. It's been implanted into pop culture for so long, had even been parodied in The Simpsons and American Dad, and even movies like This Is the End. There's nothing to build suspense over. And for this movie to not feature the most interesting character in the entire series, Nikolai Carpathia, well, that's the biggest sin of all. Nicolas Cage must really needed the money. He doesn't even give a Wicker Man performance. He just phones everything in. And even in the movie poster, he looks disinterested. So this movie, in an attempt to sway away from Christian movie stigma to appeal to a wider audience, just pissed off everyone. People don't hate it because it's a Christian movie. They hate it because it's a terrible movie. And it's no wonder why it got nominated for 3 Razzie Awards. And you know what's ironic? It lost all 3 of the Razzie Awards to a Kirk Cameron movie. And despite all of that, can you believe this somehow got worse? Because after the failure of 2014, in 2016, they attempted another take of the film franchise, this time loosely based off the Kids series, which for those who don't know, same premise, same authors, but now being about young adults and teens who were left behind. And gee, what was a popular film series released that decade involving teenage and young adult romance fantasy?
Vampire.
Oh, yeah, that. So let's make a Left Behind movie depicting a teenage love triangle after the Rapture? That's literally what Randy LaHaye, Tim LaHaye's son, admitted to the reasoning behind making it. He is quoted as saying that he was watching Twilight and that God gave him the idea to use these kids' books and make some points out of them. And he could create a brand new, fresh, young adult version of Left Behind, so it'll really speak to today's kids. A Rapture movie disguised as a teenage chick flick with a plot that has very little to do otherwise. I mean, once the Rapture stuff happens in the beginning, it pretty much turned into a completely different story involving a cult-like survival compound in the woods where they end up having to escape from Tom Everett Scott of all people. Nothing to do with the Left Behind story. What was Randy LaHaye thinking? I mean, at least he appears as Nikolai at the end to remind you that this was supposed to be a Left Behind movie. But after all of that failure, we thought there'd never be another Left Behind movie. Well, that was until 2023, when Left Behind: Rise of the Antichrist came out. A movie supposed to be a sequel to the 2014 Cage movie, only this time it's an entirely different cast playing the same roles. And who replaces Nicolas Cage as Rayford Steele? Why, none other than Kevin Sorbo, someone who has only stayed relevant because of his political commentary on social media. So if you're not a fan of his nor his political stances, then you most definitely would not want to see a movie he stars in. The Rise of the Antichrist movie is supposed to be set 6 months after the events of the Cage movie, essentially covering the last half of the first book. So again, that's 3 movies based on the first book, where again, very little happens. So we never get to see the supernatural judgments like the Wrath of the Lamb earthquake, the hail and fire mixed with blood killing off crops, the impact events, the global cooling, the plague of locusts, the 200 million horsemen, the painful sore pandemic, the seas and lakes turning to blood, the global scorching, the plague of darkness, and the largest earthquake that is ever to be recorded. Oh, and we don't get to see the Antichrist get assassinated, then resurrected, then claimed to be God, nor do we get to see the mark of the beast, nor the demonic priest with supernatural abilities, nor the final battle between good and evil and the second coming. There is so much that happens in the other books that we don't get to see because they can't stop doing stuff with the first 2 books. That is a crime. But anyway, there's definitely elements of the first book regarding the mystery plot over who's supposed to be the Antichrist, but I just could not help but laugh at the obvious right-wing wink-wink current event political jabs that this movie's characters spoke. You hear things like fake news, the science, conspiracy, rabbit hole, misinformation, triggered, canceled, almost as if the movie is trying to be a parody of the COVID pandemic disguised as a Left Behind Rapture movie. And the COVID analogies are just very obvious, especially the new plot point depicting the news and government reporting a second wave of vanishings in an attempt to fearmonger the masses and then promoting a rapture vaccine. I'm not making this up. You even have Buck Williams acting like a cross between Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson, who gets canceled when he finds out the truth of the Antichrist. The bad guys infiltrating Bible apps on smartphones to keep people from reading about the rapture, plus a shot where Rayford Steele is outside with a graffitied sign that says "All Souls Matter." If this wasn't a Kevin Sorbo Christian movie, then this sounds like something that would be a double feature with Lady Ballers and produced by the Daily Wire. And like many, my biggest complaint is that Neil McDonough isn't playing the Antichrist. The most charismatic actor in the film, the dude looks like the Antichrist. And considering other movies he's been in, he's had experiences with angels and demons while playing in the American League for Christopher Lloyd's sake. Now, is Rise of the Antichrist entertaining at least? Well, yeah, in a bad enough it's funny sort of way. No matter your political or religious stances, I'm sure many would find the obvious references to the pandemic as laughable and immediately realize, oh, I definitely can't take this seriously. And yeah, the movie has its fans, mainly those who share Kevin Sorbo's same beliefs, or those who are very much into the pre-trib rapture, thinking it's about to happen. Yeah, man, this movie really shows it's totally what they're going to do because we watched it happen in 2020. So at the same time, it can easily be said that anyone who leans left of Donald Trump or any Christian who doesn't believe in pre-trib rapture would find this movie idiotic and just see it as right-wing propaganda. And I bet you over time, this will definitely become an outdated movie as the next sign of the upcoming apocalypse will start scaring the masses, making people forget that the COVID pandemic was a thing. So, I have said a lot over the last 20 or so minutes. I've been wanting to say this rant for years, and you finally get it. I'm not at all attacking people who enjoy the movies or the novels, and I'll always love the series as a guilty pleasure. But please, the Left Behind movies and pretty much all of the End Times movies have been proven to be junk food of Christian movies, where if you digest too much junk food, then you have a hard time making room for anything, even a good Christian movie that has anything with substance to it. If you really want to digest the series without having to read it, Well, the dramatic audio is the way to go still. It does have a lot of lengthy stuff, but I feel like if somebody made a project and edited out all of the fat and just trimmed it down to the telling the story in a very precise way, it would be a very decent listen. That's how I would think of it. And that's all for now. If you stumbled on this video or you haven't subscribed yet, please leave a like and subscribe. You can talk to me directly on my Discord server if you have any suggestions for rants or would like to join a Burgers and Fries podcast episode. I'm Desert Coyote 22. Thanks for listening.